the person that's at the tip of the spear needs to be somebody who's dynamic, engaging, and captivates for our industry. And I don't know that we have that right now.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. And this week's guest is passionate about fitness being seen by the world to help with longevity and well-being. In the interview, he explains why the fitness industry needs better representation for public perception change, how to thrive in a climate of adversity, and why he joined Life Fitness as the CEO. So please enjoy this week's Escape Your Limits podcast with the CEO of Life Fitness, Mr. Chris Clawson. So Chris, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today. As in preparation to this, I was sort of looking at some of the past articles that you've done, and I was just curious about the conversation around the dinner table with your wife when you know, probably like in the last few weeks, when she's sort of saying, well, you know, you'd achieved all this with Life Fitness, and you kind of had this nice life. You were, you know, doing a little bit of consultancy. You know, what the hell made you go back?
Well, I think it's actually it's interesting because when you imagine a conversation around a dinner table with your spouse, most of the time the conversation is with somebody who you're married to. You have a family and a relationship that is part of this thing that you call home. And then you have this life that you call your career and this place you call work. In my case, my wife and I met at our company. And in fact, we met at Life Fitness. This is in October this year, it'll be our 25th anniversary. But we worked together at Life Fitness for more than a decade. So my wife is an industry person, knows the company, knows the people that I worked with me in a variety of roles. So when I was not with Life Fitness, she was still involved in the industry, even when I was working with competitors. Interestingly enough, she had overlaps where she had consulting arrangements where I was working with one company that was in competition with the company that she was consulting with, and she continued to consult with them, and we did that twice. And in both cases, people said, how does that work? She works for a direct competitor. And I said, because we just know what to talk about, what not to talk about. And we keep things that are privileged and should be considered as being taboo separate from our relationship at home. And we make those business relationships separate as well. So the conversation with my wife around the dinner table is a little bit different because not only does she understand what I do, but she also understands my company and the people that I work with and the people that we compete with, because I work for competitors. So it's actually, she knew that my heart was always at Life Fitness, and the conversation leading up to my going back to Life Fitness had been happening for quite some time. So I was working with a large number of people who were involved in the bid process to buy the business from Brunswick. So it wasn't shocking that I was going back. It was more shocking about who I went back with, because I wasn't actually working with KPS. I was working with other groups.
Yeah. And I guess at that point, you know, going back into the business and having all these sort of ideas, I suppose you must have been sideswiped when, you know, when this pandemic happened, and I suppose changed maybe what seemed like a good idea, did it?
Yeah. I mean, I would tell you that the pandemic, although tragic in many levels, as far as my relationship with the company and my relationship with the people that I work with and my relationship with our customers, I would tell you that we might be at an all-time high. So, you know, one of the quotes that I use from the very beginning is everything started to come undone, if you will, in the world. There was a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt that said, a calm sea never made for a great sailor. And I said to people, the people I work with, and said, this is a message that we need to share with all those that are part of our team, which is, you see the real ability, if you will, of a team when they're faced with adversity. And we are truly faced with adversity in ways that we are not going to understand, we're not going to appreciate, and they're going to continue to devolve and evolve. So we have to be prepared for navigating these really stormy seas, and we have to make decisions that are necessarily well considered and are considering what's best for our company and our people.
Yeah. So when this first sort of hit, and you know, I guess you realized and the organization realized that there was, you know, potentially the majority of your customers were going to close down. What as a leader in a very large organization, what went through your mind, and what was some of the first things that you felt were important to do as it relates to iFitness?
Yeah, being multinational, it came in a series of waves. So the first rock, if you will, in the water took place in Asia. So obviously we know that Wuhan was the epicenter for the disease to start this virus, but we had an immediate impact on our partners in Asia. We had an immediate impact on our offices and our headquarters for APAC, which were in Hong Kong, which very quickly thereafter, in our Osaka and Tokyo offices in Japan. And then that wave came across into the Middle East, into Western Europe and the United States. And this is a matter of days, and in some cases, maybe weeks. And then that manifested itself in Latin America and the Caribbean later. But it's interesting that the first conversation that we had around this was a conversation around timing. And it was related to trade shows, because we had trade shows that were coming up and nobody was exactly sure of what was going to happen, how long it was going to last, and what the implications of what happens were going to be on our business in the industry. And the first conversation we had came back from our team in Germany, and they said, we have some of the people on the sales and marketing side that are concerned about the virus. They're concerned about not just themselves, but the people in the office, the people and their families and their communities, and they're just genuinely concerned. What are we thinking about FIBO? And I can tell you in all honesty, I can look you right in the eye and say that conversation at our executive level took less than 5 minutes. And we said, listen, there's too much uncertainty. The risk reward doesn't even come close to coming to balance. And the right decision here is, if they're concerned, then we should be concerned, and we need to pull out of this trade show. And subsequently, the same conversation took place relative to the URSA trade show. So I will say, stop there for a moment and tell you that that was our decision there. Soon thereafter, I was having conversations with my competitors. And one of those competitors is a gentleman who I've been on podcasts with. I believe he's going to be part of your podcast series, is Rob Barker. And Rob and I have, although our competitors, we have a collegial relationship. And we talked about this and said, what are you thinking here? And these weren't competitor to competitor. These were industry cohort to industry cohort. What are you thinking? And we talked about what we thought. And so what I would say to you is, although challenging, some of the decisions were actually quite simple. And then the decisions after that become sometimes simple and sometimes quite complex.
Yeah. And with you've obviously, you've got a lot of employees spread across a lot of different, a lot of different countries and around the world, and people working in the field. How did you manage that sort of communication in terms of what was happening? And I suppose was a lot of that driven from the US, or were you managing a lot of those things locally or regionally?
Well, I would tell you there was a centralization that took place in this conversation I mentioned around the trade shows and the decisions around FIBO. One of the women on my team, an executive team, is the head of our IT group. Bridget Quinlan is her name. And Bridget's a really dynamic person. And she said, someone's going to have to lead this. Someone's going to have to take point on this, because this is going to be a situation that's going to be so fluid, and we're so uncertain right now. That uncertainty is not going to go away. And she said, I want to be the person that does that. And other people said, I want to help too. And so she enlisted the help of people across the globe. And we had a COVID-19 task force, which she headed up, which was cross-functional and cross-region. And there was a level of fluidity to the discussions. What we fell into was where we used to have our executive staff meetings, usually every other week. Sometimes we had it every week. We started to have them every day, including weekends. We started to have a communication protocol to our employees in a video series where every week we would put together informal videos to inform them of things that were happening in the business, things that were happening relative to COVID, things that we were doing around policy. And then we had a weekly newsletter that went out that kept people up to speed on what we were doing around developing and evolving the protocols, things that we were doing to help our customers, things our customers were doing to help their clients. And so it became this way more involved and way more active and dynamic communication. that continues today.
Hmm. Obviously, there's no playbook to pandemics, or I've certainly not found one. As we're sort of several months into this now, what would you say as I guess as a leader or part of a leadership team are probably some of the most important things that you've learned from I guess from running a normal business to running in this period? And I guess we're still sort of in it in some respects.
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple things. One is we had to look for ways to create value and to do things that we hadn't anticipated doing to create value. So some of the things that we did with our customers are I'll call them inobvious, but sometimes, things that become inobvious become obvious. We put together a reopening toolkit. We took best practices from other industries. We reached out to people that we knew that were in manufacturing and what were they doing in some of these large corporations, people that were in an office environment, people that were in a retail environment, people who were in large box retail environments, so accumulating best practices. We started to make available information and content, not only around protocols and opening and reopenings, but things that we could do to help. And we had 2 of our employees in one of our factories say, there's a shortage of face coverings. We can do this because we have digital cutters, we can source fabrics, we can take patterns, we have cut and sew operations, and we can do this. And they took the lead on this. This is an HR person, a person in manufacturing, had these conversations with people in other factories. And before you knew it, in a matter of not even weeks, we had 4 of our factories that were making face coverings and making those available for distribution. And from that started as a program where we made donations to those most in need, to actually selling those in bulk and taking the profits and donating them to a group called No Kid Hungry, which had nothing to do with the pandemic, but it was something that we saw as the pandemic is creating fear. And for people, nothing is more fearful than not having enough food. And if you're a kid, it's even more so. We said, there are lots of people getting after this pandemic. Let's take the money from the pandemic and let's put it someplace where we think we can make a difference.
Right, that's fantastic. So there's probably a lot of people, both on the operator side and the supply side, listening to this. And I guess one of the things that a lot of us are all dealing with is thinking about the future and strategies. How have you, obviously being a big company, you've had plans in place for a while. How have you, I guess, navigated from what would have been a normal strategy to say, okay, look, this is what we're going to do, and then almost sort of having to deal with something that you've no idea about how long it's going to go on for? How have you sort of looked at strategy and strategic decisions, balancing the short term with the long term, and what's been the thinking process behind that?
Sure. So there's a couple different elements to that. I'll say it from a corporate side, the company side first and foremost is, when you can't be in an office, when you can't be in front of your customer, when you can't have necessarily the same interactions that you have in a hallway or in a casual conversation where you just step in someone's office, things change, and they change very quickly. And I would say to you, one of the things that we found was our ability to adapt quickly to technology, to experience different versions of that technology and find what was successful and what was less successful, and then embrace our reality. And what we found, and it's interesting because we've asked the question to our employees, is how do you feel about the company? How are we doing? And one of the things that came back to us was we've never felt as connected to our company as we have the last 4 months, because of the frequency around communication, the openness and willingness to communicate, and the inclusion that you have in the conversation. So that part's been really good. I would tell you that, connecting with the customers have been open to virtual conversations and they understand and appreciate it, but they've also been quite interested in the fact that we've gone out and done research to try to help them to understand how their members feel. In the US, we talked to over 250 members of clubs and just exercisers to talk about their willingness to come back and the things that they would want to see within the reopening cycle. We did that in Europe as well. We talked to people to say, what are you doing? What are you seeing in your clubs now that they're open, as they started to open up before Western Europe and the US? Where have you had success and where have you had failures? And we've communicated that to others. These are sometimes, in some cases, competitors. Sometimes they don't even know each other exists. But we've tried to facilitate information to and from our customers, and then also to and from what we've learned outside of our industry to the customer. And then lastly, as far as what we're seeing in the business is we've seen a boon in our consumer business. It's gone crazy. I mean, our business is so far beyond our capabilities. I mean, we're operating with lead times that we've never had before, because our factories were already starting to slow down because we were coming into the slower part of the consumer season, which is Q2, Q3. And we usually we ramp up in Q3 for Q4, Q1. And we had to turn that switch back on. And I'm going to tell you, we'll never catch up this year. We may not catch up next year just because there's so much more demand than there is supply across not just our industry, but some of the suppliers that supply other industries. But that's been a tremendous story. But I'll tell you, the story that's probably been the most interesting is, making our technology available to the customers. So we have a Life Fitness Coach, which is on-demand content for exercise and exercise videos. We've had over 75,000 of those videos being used and used regularly. We have our Life Fitness On Demand content that's able to be used on not only commercial product, but our high-end consumer derivatives, which is instructional. It's for beginners, intermediate, and advanced exercises across 6 different products. So upright recumbent bike, arc trainer, stair climber, treadmill, and elliptical. That's had tremendous success. And then we have the things that we're doing around our app and Life Fitness On Demand as a whole. So we are convinced, and we have been convinced, but now our customers are convinced that there's consumer brand extension is not a competitor to their, well, I'll call it their brick and mortar locations. It enhances the relationship. It enhances their brand, and it extends the conversation beyond those 4 walls to their whole exercise persona as a member user or exerciser, because you can connect with them 24/7 anywhere.
Yeah, I've certainly seen a lot of operators sort of offering fitness equipment for people to use at home and alongside some of their content, which I think is an interesting development. So one of the things I'm interested in, I suppose, is you've got a good view of many different markets in probably quite a lot of detail. What are some of the observations that you've seen in the various different markets in terms of how they've handled that, and whether that's from a regional perspective or a channel perspective?
Well, I'll tell you this. I've said this repeatedly, and I think one of the challenges that we have as an industry is we don't have a great spokesperson for our industry. We have operators that have been forced to be spokespeople for an industry. That's a real problem. We've had to have people who are operators step up and speak for the industry because they had to, because they were given a stage and they did a great job. So that's been a challenge. I will say that the biggest issue that I see in our industry is we truly believed that we were part of a solution. We truly believe that we were an integral part of the health and welfare delivery system globally. And we truly believe that we would be seen as an essential industry. And in all cases, at the very outset, that they were all backhandedly dismissed, that we weren't seen as essential. We weren't seen as a delivery of health and well-being. And we were not seen as something that you couldn't possibly imagine doing without. They were lumping our industry into the same conversation with theaters, with bar rooms, with restaurants, instead of looking at us being essential. And so one of the things that we've been talking about as an industry is we have no reason to be defensive. We have no reason to be apologetic. What we need to do is figure out how do we create the conversation around why our industry is needed and why it's essential, why we fight against obesity, why we fight against hypertension, why we fight against type 2 diabetes, why we fight against people having all sorts of emotional challenges because of depression. We are truly frontline. And so I say, as everyone celebrates the first responders, as they should, What about the people who are proactively trying to make it so that there are less things to respond to? And that's where I see our industry, number one, having an opportunity to get that conversation. And secondly, when I say we have to go back and create confidence now when they are coming back, recognize that we have, as an industry, decades of being clean. I used to ask the question in this conversation to say, when was the last time you got out of a plane seat and cleaned up after yourself? When have you ever left a restaurant and cleaned up after yourself? When was the last time you went to the theater or a bar and cleaned up after yourself? Yet for decades, when you got off of a piece of exercise equipment, you sprayed it with the bottle and you wiped it off. You used a wipe and you wiped it off. You used your towel and you wiped it off. And then the staff at the facility did the same thing repeatedly throughout the day. So we've been doing what people are talking about starting to do for decades. And now the industry has taken it up to multiple levels and exponentially beyond that.
So what do you think? Like, I think you make a great point there, and you seem like you'd be a good spokesman for that job as well. But what do you think is the reason, being it's so obvious and it's preventative, and most of what's being talked about and the money that's being spent is on the cure and the vaccine, and certainly if you look at the information that's coming out there now, there's some fantastic information about some of the really important preventative things that we could be doing, because we're sick. We're a sick society, in so many reasons. Why do you think, when it's something that's so obvious, and there's so much that can be done to take the pressure off a lot of these, the medical, the National Health Service, for example, that it's not being listened to or it's not being taken care of? Is it just down to money and the industry's not got the right leverage against the politicians, or are you seeing anything that's a bit more obvious?
Well, part of the challenge you have when you deal with politicians is politicians really do like things to fit neatly into a box, and the more neatly it fits in the box, the more comfortable they are. And one of the examples of in the United States, as in other places, if you look at the conversation around healthcare, and they talk about how expensive healthcare is and how we need to reform our healthcare system. We need to reform our hospital system. And yet they never once talk about the things that lead to these problems. They don't talk about the legal system. They don't talk about the cost to administer. And they don't talk around people's behaviors that lead to maladies and to these misfortunate situations, right? So if you think about it, if you wanted to talk about healthcare, then you would talk about our legal system and reforming the legal system. You would talk about the cost to administer, and you would talk about how do we get people to be sick less often. But when they talk about it, they strictly talk about it in terms of how do we deliver this thing by having people pay for somebody's healthcare without addressing the real issue. So this is a continuation of that conversation. In this case, you're talking about a pandemic. And in the pandemic, this is the first time, I believe this to be true, it's the first time in the history of modern society that people who are healthy have been quarantined. They've been quarantined. People who are sick are the ones that are usually quarantined. People who are susceptible or likely to get sick are quarantined, but they're quarantining everybody. Instead of looking at it and saying, wow, you know what? How do we get to this point where we don't have this happen again? And one of the ways to do that is with better nutrition, with better exercise, with more activity. All these things would be really good so that the next time when we have a swine flu, the next time we have the flu, the next time we have the H3N2, which was the Hong Kong flu in 1968, we don't have so many people die. And so that was one of the things, Matthew, I tried to talk about with our organization, was you have to always look at things through history's perspective and understand this isn't the first time something's happened, and how have we dealt with it in the past. And one of the examples I gave was, if you go back to 1968 to the H3N2, which was the Hong Kong flu, 4 million people died of the Hong Kong flu in the course of 18 months. 4 million. What did we learn from that? Well, we got better with our flu virus. We really encouraged people to take the vaccine, but we also talked to people about understanding their symptoms. But understanding, more importantly, is that if you're healthy and you eat and sleep better, you're going to probably deal with situations better than if you're sick, you're infirmed, and you're have all these underlying conditions. And so I think coming out of this pandemic, our industry needs to talk about, again, why we're essential on so many levels and get people to appreciate this isn't about recreation. It's not about having a great time. That's part of it. It's also about just being healthy.
Yeah. So do you think that's an organization that doesn't exist for the industry that needs to be set up, or do you think it's probably some, how do you break that down? Because I hear it, I have so many conversations with people, and you hear this on so many panels, and it, it seems out of all the industries, the people, the frontliners are passionate, they're energetic, they've got everything it would take, but yet, we can't seem to sort of, and I know some great stuff's been done, but what would, if there was something good come out of it, what would you say that needs to be? Rethinking about the industry organizations, or what would you say without being too upsetting too many people?
I'm not going to worry about ruffling feathers here. What I would say to you is, when you look at an organization, you have to ask yourself what the organization's reason to exist is. What is their go-to-market, if you will, to create some sort of demand for, one, to be part of the organization, and two is, what are they delivering to the marketplace for people to say, this is an organization that should exist, and this is an organization that has a reason to exist in the eyes of a multitude of not only constituents, but people on the outside. And there are certain leaders in industries that do that naturally. There are people on the tech side, if you said it's Steve Jobs, it's Elon Musk, it's, whoever it is that's leading the conversation around where the world could be and how it might get there. And then there are organizations that do that same thing. And what I would say to you is, what we've learned in our organization is that being open, honest, and trying to find solutions is really important. And what I would say relative to our trade and our industry is, we need to have somebody who recognizes that the most important thing for a trade association is to represent, to be spokespeople for the industry as a whole, and to make sure that they are on message and able to deliver that message to whomever the audience is effectively. And if they need to have people underneath them who are really good at being functional and operators, that's great. But the person that's at the tip of the spear needs to be somebody who's dynamic, engaging, and captivates for our industry. And I don't know that we have that right now.
Yeah, great point. And I would certainly agree with everything that you've said there. So changing gears slightly then, we obviously we're a manufacturer ourselves, like you, and I guess a lot of businesses are at different stages of opening around the world, and I guess when people do come back to work and clubs and chains and that start opening, they've got a number of things to deal with. One of them could be including moving their facilities around to make it more to be able to comply to some of the regulations. Some of it could be expanding, and there's a number of different things that they are likely to need to do. But from a manufacturer's perspective and relationships with their manufacturers, what are some of the things that owners, operators of a fitness-based facility need to be aware of coming out of this situation? Whether it's in terms of service, support, lead times, what are some of the key things that they need to be aware of that will help them get through that part of their business?
Sure. So I think that the conversation relative to recommendations and expectations are surely market specific, because there are different rules, and there's no hard and fast rule around this is what you need to do to be successful. So they are market specific, and in some cases they're debilitating, right? They're creating expectations and requirements that are untenable. So, Washington State has said that each member needs to have 300 square feet of space. Well, 300 square feet of space is gigantic. It's a large room. So each person needs to have their own room. It's like, well, that doesn't work in real life. Nevertheless, they don't have those same restrictions for big box retail. You can walk into a big box retailer and they don't take anybody's temperature. They can go anywhere they want at any time. They can touch anything they want, and nobody cleans up after them because they don't know that they touched it. So I think understanding and appreciating that's going to be really important. But I would say to you that what they're going to do and what they're doing right now is, when they know the rules, is they're creating solutions, constantly trying to solve for, upgrading their cleaning protocols, creating social distancing, managing the social distancing, training their staff, training their members, but also looking for solutions that were non-traditional, moving outside. One of the projects that we just completed was a collaboration that we did with BeaverFit. It's called Hammer Strength Outdoor Box. It's actually a container that opens up into an outdoor facility, if you will. And at the end of the day, it all goes back in the box, the door closes and you lock it. So we're trying to create solutions that not only fit within the confines of a facility by helping them with spacing and helping them with disabling consoles. So we have a disable feature now in our cardio products that you can turn them off, and it doesn't say out of order. It says that it's been disabled on purpose to create social distancing. So I think that's a part of it. We're also trying to continue to reinforce that don't be afraid of going digital. Don't be afraid of connecting through content and content delivery with your member, staying in touch with them. And if you don't have the ability to do it to yourself, partner with somebody like us or others that can help you create your own branded solutions. Stay in touch with your member, and let's try to weather this thing.
Yeah. Are there any, I know certainly in the Far East at the moment, there's a lot of raw material challenges. A lot of people are going after the same, I guess in all industries really, but steels and cast irons. Is there any likely delays in terms of getting product because of things like that? Or are you guys, not impacted too much on that front?
No, I think it depends on the category. The hottest products for the last several months have been the accessories, like what you guys make. Multiple reasons. One is price point. Two is space required. Three is ease of use and mobility. You can take it with you. You can use it in your home or your apartment. So the accessory business has been the most popular, and there are pieces within that accessory business that are incredibly popular. So barbells and dumbbells, so the weights and kettlebells and things like that have been super high demand, and the lead times around those have been challenged for sure. The same thing is true for consumer home electronics. A lot of people are hunkering down in their homes. Well, guess what? Manufacturers like ourselves, we have to compete with those same components that they do in consumer electronics for our console displays. So, lead times are longer there, and you have to have a willingness to commit and to carry inventory in order to make your customers happy when we come out the other side of this. Because there's two levels of our being a supplier. There's the level of us marketing and selling things to operators, and there's a level of us being able to service it. And so we're looking at it both ways. Are we doing a good job of continuing to supply our customers? And the answer is, we think so. We've had all of our factories open. We've only had very small shutdowns, a matter of 10 days or less. Our factories have remained open, and we've been able to continue to supply our customers. But there's also a level of, do you have the parts? When something breaks, can you go out and service it? And when things come back to normal, will you have a steady stream of inventory to support your customers? They come back online. And most importantly, can you continue to service them when they come back online?
So do you think people need to be planning some of this stuff further in advance, as opposed, in most cases, people like, we're certainly in this thing, people, if they want to order something, they expect to get it very, very quickly within a number of weeks. Are you recommending people take a longer approach and try to get a little bit more sort of organized in terms of when they want to open because of some of these component challenges that you mentioned?
I would say it's less so on the commercial side and more so on the consumer side. The commercial industry surely understands what's going on. Not only do they understand it, but they appreciate the fact that the conversation they're having with us is probably a lot like the conversation that they're having with other suppliers, because we all make the same sorts of things and source the same sorts of components. But on the consumer side, the consumer expectation is completely different. Their expectation is, well, of course I should order it. It should be here, because the things that they're used to ordering are in a different world than us. If you think about how people reacted to toilet paper, for example, you remember that was a huge story, right? Did you ever remember somebody talking about a toilet paper shortage before this? No. In our industry, there's always been an expectation of, when you order it, commercially I'm speaking, this is about how long it takes. It takes around 4 to 6 weeks, okay? So if we're communicating with our customers and say, just so you know, it's no longer 4 to 6 weeks, it's now 6 to 8 weeks, or it's 6 to 12 weeks, or whatever. That's not an unusual conversation, because depending on the time of the year, we've had that for decades. If you're ordering a piece of strength equipment in the first week of December, you're not going to get it 2 weeks later. If you're ordering a piece of strength equipment in April, and you might actually get it sooner, because it might actually be in inventory, because we're building inventory in anticipation of the season. You see what I'm saying? So our industry commercially understands the dynamic, and I think they're less concerned, and maybe should be more concerned, to your point, because I don't think some of our competitors are actually building inventory, and I don't think their factories have been open. And I don't think when the business comes back online, they're going to be able to service the customer or service the parts that they need to support it. On the consumer side, conversely, I think most companies are hand to mouth, and they're marketing whatever they have access to, because there's so many things that they're out of.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly, there's the dumbbells was the new toilet paper in the fitness space. That's for sure. Yep. I think I've seen some of the crazy prices for dumbbells going on eBay, because you've not been able to get hold of them. But what about on the servicing side? So has anything changed on that front from your business? Is there new protocols in terms of you guys entering facilities and the level of support you can offer, or is that sort of pretty much unchanged?
Yeah, I would say when you had shelter in place, when you couldn't go anywhere and do anything, let's just take that, put it aside, because it was what it was. When those protocols were being developed, when shelter in place started to fall and opportunity to go back in facilities started to open, we created protocols for our technicians, both our technicians and people who are independent service providers globally, to talk about what it means to go into somebody's facilities, what the expectations are of the customer, both consumer and commercial customer, and then making sure that we're doing the right things by the customer. Where you saw this, and I'll say this is not the norm, but we saw this very proactively, is some operators said, I don't know how long this is going to take, but I don't have anybody coming into my clubs because I'm not allowed to, but I'm allowed at some level to have my clubs open for operations. Let's go ahead and do the remodel that we had planned to do 7 months from now. Let's go ahead and do the remodel we were going to do in 2021, because I can't have anybody in my clubs anyway, but I can let you in. So the construction companies came in and either continued to build a greenfield expansion, or they did a complete remodel, and it took less time and cost them less money because there weren't any members there. They were proactive in addressing this as more of an opportunity than just a really bad situation.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on where this is? And I know it's a difficult question, but what are your thoughts based on what you're seeing at the moment in terms of the future of the commercial fitness space? Because I think, as you mentioned earlier, there's definitely a not just a want, but a need for people to be healthier and to get that advice. And the COVID thing's probably brought that to a head. But with what we're seeing at the moment, California's still closed down. I know New York may be opening, and I know there's other countries around the world that are either still closed or in the early stages of opening, or maybe even closed again. What's your thoughts on the future? Is it going to be a very different space to what it was because of these restrictions, and the health and fitness facilities is going to look very, very different? Or do you think it's just time before people can get that right balance of how to operate within these constraints?
Everyone thinks that having a vaccine is going to solve everything. I think the vaccine will, probably the most salient thing that this vaccine will address is people's confidence, if you will, in going out and being about. Okay. And I use the example I talked about historical, in a normal cold and flu season in the United States, somewhere between 35 and 50,000 people die every single flu season of common cold and flu. Okay. There's a vaccine already. And by the way, that vaccine has evolved every year for decades. So it's not going to solve for everything. What I would say to you is there are going to be parts of the industry that will recover faster and some that will recover slower. Examples of places that will recover faster will be facilities that create levels of confidence in their ability to maintain whatever levels of social distancing and cleanliness that people expect. That's going to be different by market. There's going to be parts of the industry that are going to be affected because of the industry itself. For instance, hospitality. If people are traveling less for business because it's being mandated by their employer, there'll be fewer business travelers. Therefore, the hospitality will be affected negatively, and they may change the dynamic of their investment, not only in hospitality, but things associated with like fitness within hospitality. So those are sort of extremes there, that one is controlled by the rules in the local market and people's ability to operate within those rules. And the other is predicated on an industry and how people change their behavior within the industry. The latter will take a longer time to come back around, and the prior will be based on rules being loosened to allow people back in the facility.
And you mentioned consumer earlier, and that business is very strong for Life Fitness at the moment. How do you see or do you see the traditional bricks and mortar evolving the products and having home elements to it, and what do you see that you guys are sort of playing in that space, and because I guess, as you said earlier, that you could be seen as a bit of a competitor selling solutions for people in the home if it's not linked to a club potentially.
It kind of cuts multiple ways. I talked about this many times here, using the sports analogy. When sports first went on television back in the 1930s in the US, and then later on in other sports, this is baseball originally in the 1930s, and then later on in other sports, almost every sport, whether it was soccer, whether it was basketball, whether it was football, believed that by having that content, that live sporting event on TV, would not allow them to maintain the same levels of fan attendance at the facilities because they could watch it on TV. And what they found over the course of the last several decades is not only did you have a greater level of commitment, a greater level of affinity for the brand, a greater level of affinity for the players, but your attendance actually went up because of that. And we've been saying this for years, is that your best member, your best client, is the person who has their fitness life being 7 days a week. And when they can't make it to the club, they're doing something outside to stay fit, stay engaged, and stay active, because they joined your facility for a reason. And that reason is very likely not able to be met in their home, or not able to be met on a sidewalk or on a trail. It's part of their lifestyle. So I think having clubs experience what we have around on-demand content and digital offerings, and recognizing that it enhances the member engagement, is going to change their perspective. And in some cases, it's affirming what somebody already believed. And in other cases, it's changing their mind to believe it. I think that's going to continue, and I don't think it's going to change.
And with, if you look at companies that have certainly been thriving through this, like Peloton, that are, they're not, I suppose you could argue that they're competing for a membership with a fitness club, and then I guess you've got fitness clubs or fitness businesses that are creating their own content. What do you think is going to, which side of that do you think is going to lead? Because I guess, as you know yourself, probably creating that content in itself is a very different business model from making equipment and also running fitness clubs. Do you think things like collaborations are going to be important to be able to sort of capitalize on that, certainly with a lot of your customer base?
I think it really depends on the customer. Some customers have the desire and the wherewithal to create themselves, and others have the desire, but they don't have the wherewithal. So I think there'll be combinations of conversations, some where we as a manufacturer create with our customer solutions where they can take advantage of our scale and deliver that as a branded solution. And in other cases, we may augment that, where somebody who already has their own solution wants another solution. And example of that would be, if you look at our displays, we offer content that's uniquely ours, but we also offer content that's not ours. I don't know. I don't have any vested interest in Netflix or Hulu or Roku or any of those, but we offer that content because our customer's customer finds value in that. And we partner with other people who aren't necessarily delivering what we deliver, but they're delivering value to our customers and their customers, and we partner with them. So I think there'll be combinations of those. I think where you're going to see people fail and fail miserably is if they believe that they're going to go back to what I'll call the 20th century model, where I just have to have a nice place with nice showers and some nice classes, and I'm going to be just as successful as I used to be. I think that the consumer, in this case, the member client, their expectation has changed, and what they desire to be part of their fitness lifestyle is more than just being a member of one location.
Yeah, I've certainly noticed that myself. I've kind of got used to doing things from home. I still want to do the gym, but I've sort of created a bit of a space now and a time in the day to do that home. And I guess the fact that I work out in my home a lot more makes that even more convenient. Just sort of interesting to see, whether when people can go back to gyms, whether those new habits, sort of change the amount of time that they'll be in the gym as opposed to home, and then does the home solution need to be increased? Because certainly, I guess go on.
Let me give you an analogy here, and I think this is a very fair analogy. Okay, so most everybody that you know and I know, going back generations, has had a kitchen in the place that they live, and whether they used it on a regular basis or not, they also always had an alternative. And that alternative was either a sit-down restaurant or carry-out, right? I mean, for a long, long time, let's say more than hundreds of years that existed, where people could either make it in their home. But you go to a restaurant for the experience. You go to the restaurant for variety. You go to the restaurant for a social environment. You go to the restaurant for the difference in what might actually take place there. Like you might meet somebody if you're young and single, or you might run into friends and strike up a conversation. There's so much more than just eating. Where in the home, it might have a familial aspect, but you eat because it's part of what you do to survive. A health club is really not that much different, because we've had this content and these offerings available for decades, whether they were through VHS, whether they were through DVDs. And if you look at it, whether it was a Jane Fonda video, whether it was Billy Blanks, whether it was P90X, all of those things have existed for decades. And in some cases, people use those instead of the club. Sometimes people use those as part of their club or their membership experience. Some people said, it's just not for me. The difference is right now is people have been forced to experience this. And I'm saying to you, I believe that they've had mostly good experiences. But when the restaurants opened back up again, people went back to the restaurant and said, man, I miss my favorite restaurant. I miss the social aspect. I miss the variety. And I believe the reason why people are members of facilities is for the same reason. Is like, I can go to classes. I can use strength equipment and cardio equipment. I can use the sauna. I can play racquetball or tennis. All the reasons why they joined are still going to be there. They just need to be allowed to go back.
I like that. I've never thought of those two, but yeah, the kitchen and the restaurant analogy is a nice one. I think I'll use that myself. But yeah, that's great. So a couple more questions before we wrap up, then, Chris. So what's it been like for you as an individual? I know you've got a huge team around you, and I know that it's not just down to you, but as you're on here, what's it been like for you? From a mindset perspective of entering this, you've got thousands of people that are within the organization, a lot of responsibility, a lot of uncertainty. How have you dealt with this, and has it been a tough time? And what have you done to sort of keep yourself sane and make those good decisions?
Yeah. So I mentioned at the very outset of this, talking about the quote from FDR around rough seas and being a sailor. I will say to you, I've been part of and I've led multiple management teams, both at Life Fitness and other companies. And I've worked with some great people, not just at Life Fitness, but other companies as well. But the team I have right now is just spectacular. And I didn't hire all these people. Some of them I've known for years, and some of them I've encountered and become more acquainted with since I've been back for a little over a year. But they're just spectacular humans. They really are. And the makeup of somebody in trial, and the makeup of somebody in situations where you're not sure, and the uncertainty can create all sorts of angst and anxiety, if you will, within their functional groups in the company as a whole. But I work with some just superhuman beings, and not only that, but just the people that we encounter in our industry. I argue that our industry is comprised of just exceptional people that are in this industry for a reason. They're in the industry because they absolutely enjoy it. They enjoy all sorts of aspects of it, and different, the nuanced effect of being an operator versus a trainer versus somebody who's in sales versus a manufacturer. All those things are different and the same in some sense, but we have some just spectacular people with great stories. And I just believe our industry, I truly believe that we are the magic pill. And I want to make sure that we get out and tell the magic pill story.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, bad news and negative stuff. And I'm not taking away from, it has been a terrible time for a lot of people. Fortunately, I've not been close to anyone that's been affected. But if we, to focus on the positive and let's narrow this down to the fitness industry. If there was one or two sort of positive takeaways that you think we should all sort of, I guess, think about or note as we've come out of that, what would you say are some of the good things that are likely to come as a result of this?
Well, I'll tell you, when I say likely, let's just say I'm hopeful, because likely is going to be the work that has to be done still. So we're not going to come out of this with what I would be hopeful for. I mentioned this earlier. I would be hopeful for, we will establish ourselves as being an essential industry, that we will establish ourselves as being a key cog in the health and well-being delivery. I think that's really important for us. And I believe that we will find somebody to be our voice, or people to be our voice, to say, I'm not speaking for me and I'm not speaking for my company. I'm speaking for all of these different people and all of these different facets of our industry, whether that be the health club business, whether that be athletics, whether that be performance, whether that be recreation, whether that be a non-membership or membership, whether that be consumer. It's around this concept of fitness as being, again, essential to our well-being, both emotionally and physically. I'm hopeful that we're going to come out the other side of this, and we're going to rise to the occasion. And if this ever happens again, people will come to us with the solutions.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate the insights and the stories. And there's a few I've been scribbling down and going to use for myself as well. So I hope, wish you and your team best of luck, and I look forward to seeing you for a beer face-to-face at some point in the not too distant future. Absolutely. Or maybe a wine.
Whatever you choose.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome, man. Talk to you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.